Welcome and hello to everyone, and great that you have all joined us in a webinar, The Future of Talent, organized by Quintop Management Consultants, Crunchr and Millennial Lift. And in the coming hour, all of our speakers will provide you with their talent management insights. But first, why the importance of this webinar now? A recent newsflash showed the following. Companies and how they deal with talents go through drastic changes due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Obviously, COVID-19 had a major and mainly negative impact on all of our lives. But what does it mean for talent? Does it give us the opportunity to reshape the way we think about talent? And what will be the way forward when we think about talent management? We will answer those questions in this webinar. And we will do this by means of a structured model. We call this the VMA model. From a broad vision to how we measure and to what actions to take. This will be taken on by the presenters of this webinar, which will be Quintop, Crunchr and Millennial Lift. And then we move on to the agenda of this webinar. And Quintop will start this webinar. And to give a vision, our first presenter will be Gavin Capewell, and he works as a global talent manager at ING. He will give an insight in the changing world of work and how millennials play a role in this. Then, to provide an insight in the measure part, Randstad will present a case on how they get insights in the talent journey by using Crunchr. Presenters will be Ronald Kliphuis and Rick Vos from Randstad. And then, to move into the action mode, we will be presented by Jasper Scholten and Dirk van Uffelen from Millennial Lift, and they will give an insight in the future of talent and how to develop the new generation. But you are probably wondering who is talking to you all this time right now. So before we move to our presenters, I will briefly introduce myself. My name is Paula Bos. I am 25 years old, and it makes me born in 1995. So you could say that I am the classic example of a millennial. I did a bachelor's in communications and a master's in HR. And right now I'm working as a junior consultant at Quintop Management Consultancy. Quintop is a management consultancy with about 30 consultants. We work for multinationals and we are experts in human resources. From HR advisory to IT, change and behavior implementations. During my 1.5 years at Quintop, I gained experiences in the fields of talent and change management, and I developed a great passion for human development and everything that has to do with it. So I'm really excited hosting this webinar. I would like to start with some announcements regarding this webinar. And important to emphasize is that after every presentation, we will answer 1 or 2 of your questions. You can ask these questions in the open or the private chat at the right side of your screen. When there is time, we will answer the rest of your questions after this webinar, or we will get back to you personally. Also a note is that this webinar will be recorded, so we can send it to you after. So now let's get started with our first presenter, and I would really like to introduce to you Gavin Capewell.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hello, my name is Gavin Capewell. I am the Global Lead for Talent at ING. And in this presentation, this very brief presentation, what I wanted to do was give a flavour of some of the larger or wider changes which are happening in the business environment at the moment. Briefly look at how organisations are responding to them in terms of how they structure themselves, and then a knock-on impact for how people think about and manage their careers. And then we'll briefly look at the millennial generation, their behaviours and norms that they bring to the workplace, and the implications for employers. Okay, so let's begin. So look, I think on this slide, there's clearly a number of broad changes here, which all organizations are being subject to. I don't think there's any surprises here, but the one I'd probably call out, which having the most profound impact is digitalization. So, and by way of example, we think about the world's largest retailer, Amazon. It has no shops. If we think about the world's largest hotelier, Airbnb, it has no hotels. And then also the world's largest taxi firm, Uber, have no cabs. And really all of those changes are being enabled by digitalization. And I think coupled with robotics and AI, which admittedly is still in its early stages, I think once that domain begins and that discipline begins to mature, then that's really just going to continue to accelerate the pace of change across all industries. And in response to these changes, lots of organizations are now having to think about how they structure themselves, how they arrange their operations, which in turn then impacts careers and how people think about and manage their careers. And then similarly, we're now seeing the emergence of 3, even 4 generations within the workforce, and each generation brings its own norms, its own behaviors. And one of the most prominent ones, which we're seeing with the millennial generation, is this idea of purpose or personal purpose. And so all of these factors need to be taken into account when organizations think about how they manage their businesses. And I think if you look at this slide on the left-hand side, we see a very traditional organizational structure. So this is really born out of a work of Taylorism. So a very steep structure with a focus on hierarchy and specialization, and lots of organizations adopted this model and were very successful with it. I think Ford Motor Company was a really nice example of a company who adopted this before a lot of their competitors and really outperformed the competition for a number of years by adopting this approach. But it does have its limitations, and in a much more dynamic environment, this organizational structure is not always the most successful. It can be a little bit rigid, it can be a little bit siloed, and it can also be quite slow moving. And so from the 1980s onwards, what we started to see was this transition more towards flatter organizational structures. And really this was driven by greater pressure from shareholders for improved returns. So a lot of it was really focused on cost reduction. So you can see the 2 pyramids next to each other, that the flatter structure clearly has a lot fewer levels. So what we saw is a lot of middle management teams being removed from organizations. And then a flatter structure really should help to reduce costs, simplify the organization, and then lead to faster decisions and execution. And now to the right of this slide, what we see is this transition to the agile way of working. Now, I'm not saying all organizations will be adopting what you see on the right-hand side here, and this is certainly the more progressive path which ING has taken. And you can just see by the way that the graphic is shown on the slide, it's very different to what you see in the more traditional organizational structures. So we have a focus on tribes, on squads, on chapters. And really this is about multidisciplinary teams working together to deliver for the customer, a really kind of customer-centric approach. And then the idea behind that is that the organization can then deploy products and innovation, particularly digital innovations, at a much quicker pace than ever before. And so this transition in organizational structures is then influencing the evolution of careers. So on the left-hand side, what you see is the traditional ladder progression. So employees moving vertically through the organization in a kind of a single linear pathway. So within a finance domain, within a risk domain, et cetera, et cetera. And in that model, it tends to be a little bit more tenure-based. So you sort of do your time and then you move through the organization. But with the lattice pathways, and this is what it's increasingly moving towards now, we're seeing, you can just see from a graphic that it's much more fluid, much more adaptable. And that the pathways, well, you can clearly still go via a vertical pathway, but now it's much more opportunity for lateral moves and diagonal moves, both up and down. And even within ING, we're now seeing people moving within and across domains. So you might start off in HR, then move to finance, into risk, and then potentially come back to HR. So much more dynamic career structure and the career pathways, and one that's really performance driven now. And so what we're also starting to see now is 3, even 4 generations in the workforce, and each generation brings their own norms, behaviours, and kind of aspirations. So the traditionalists on the far left of this slide, you can see these are what I kind of call the lifers, the people who kind of one company all of their life. But then the baby boomers are subtly different. They had a much more of a focus on live to work, the kind of office face time. And then with the Gen X, what we saw is, again, another subtle change. So a move from live to work more towards work to live. So work should not define people's lives, and there's real greater aspiration for an improved work-life balance. And then we see the millennials joining the organization, and millennials now have feel much more in ownership or empowered to own their careers. And they have an aspiration to find much more meaningful work. So let's take a little bit of a deep dive onto the millennial population, and here again some of the findings from the research. I think a lot of this is really driven again by the world that millennials have grown up in. So, and undoubtedly the tech savvy, I think, is probably the most prominent part here. Most millennials have grown up in a world surrounded by the internet and digital, their phones, and they can pretty much organize their entire life over their phone. And I think that really then impacts both the global outlook and also the networking piece. So it's now much easier for millennials to be kind of globally networked across countries, across disciplines, across domains, etc. And by the same token, I think we're also seeing that tech savvy, so social media really enabling a much more broader view and focus on purpose driven. And what I mean by that is we're seeing campaigns such as Extinction Rebellion, which is really kind of born largely out of and driven by social media. And then we have this idea of growth mindset, what I call growth mindset here in the bottom left. And this is really about millennials having quite an aspiration to continually grow, develop, and progress through the organization, continually fine tune and hone their skills. And then interestingly, this idea of teamwork, so certainly compared to their parents' generation, the research suggests that a lot of millennials were schooled in a way where their assignments were completed within teams, whereas their parents might have done more of their sort of education, schooling, and assignments on their own. And so millennials naturally expect that to be followed through into the workplace. We also see a greater aspiration for work-life balance. I think, again, the trend that we saw with some of the previous generations, but I think this is more amplified now amongst the millennial population. And then just finally on this slide, clearly millennials have high aspirations, but beyond aspirations, I think there's a real sense of entitlement that the research points to. And so that really sets the bar quite high for organizations. So this is the final slide now, and what I'll try to do here is just pull out some of the implications that I think employers need to be aware of when having an increasingly larger proportion of millennials in the workplace. First is this idea of continuous coaching and feedback. So I think a lot of organizations have now moved across and away from a kind of a single performance reviews, performance appraisal at the end of the year, and increasingly aspiring for continuous coaching and continuous conversations. I think that's really important. I think millennials want lots of feedback on how they can improve, how they can develop, and how they can grow. Interesting, this idea of meaningful work. I think that's important for managers too, to be mindful that millennials have a higher bar in terms of what they expect from the workplace, and so providing stretching assignments and meaningful work is important. I think if organizations fail to do that, then they really risk having a disengaged millennial workforce, or a millennial workforce which has a high turnover, high attrition. But clearly there's something here in terms of expectation management, and millennials bring high expectations to the organization, and I think it's really important that companies think carefully about managing expectations, both before the millennials join and when they do join. So it needs to be quite clear that this is a two-way street, that most organizations now are heavily performance-based, and so people can kind of realize their aspirations and a career progression, but it needs to be much more performance-driven, and it's not this kind of sense of entitlement that we've seen within the millennial literature. I think that the final two bits here, or the next two bits around collaborative projects, diversity of thought and experience, I think for a lot of organizations, particularly large corporates like ING, we operate in this way anyway. So a lot of our projects are cross-border, cross-domain, which brings together people from a huge range of different backgrounds and experiences. So I think for a lot of large employers, that's kind of natural, and that'll play out in the workplace. But maybe something for smaller organizations to be mindful of when you're employing a millennial workforce. And then the final point on this slide, and I think this is probably one of the most interesting ones now, particularly given the current pandemic, is this idea of flexible working practices. So, there's this idea of a digital nomad, where we see lots of millennials who are able to, say, work in Thailand and write code for a tech company on the other side of the world. Now, that kind of idea or concept, I think, has really been expanded with Corona. A lot of people overnight, earlier in the year, had to move from a kind of office environment to working from home. So I think that has that's going to raise the bar even higher for organizations. And it's something which companies will need to think about going forward, how they arrange their working practices. Okay, good. Well, that brings me to the end of this presentation. I hope you found it helpful and interesting. And now I'll move over to any questions.
Thank you very much for your insights, Gavin. And I'm really sorry, because we noticed that some of our viewers did not hear anything when Gavin started speaking. So for all of the speakers, you first have to click on tab to unmute to hear them. So that's maybe good to know. And so as Gavin already said, we now go to the questions. And there is already a question that had came in from Tim. And he is saying, thanks, Gavin, for sharing your vision. Out of all of the implications for employers mentioned on the final slide, which do you think will be the most challenging for organizations? So I will now then give the word to Gavin.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I think it's a good question. I guess if I had to pick one of them, I would probably say the transition to continuous coaching and feedback. So a lot of organizations have managers and leaders who've grown up in a world where performance management has been a one-time activity, typically at the end of the year, and often executed in a way which is quite poor. So this transition to continuous conversations in terms of performance and development, I think, is quite a shift for a lot of managers, and that will require a considerable amount of capability build and upskilling amongst that group. And I think if you're a large corporate such as ING, and you have, we have 4,000 managers across 40 countries with 10 corporate languages, you can get an appreciation of the size and the scale that we need to work at to build that capability.
Yes, thank you, Gavin, for answering these questions. I don't see any more questions coming in. So then I would like to give the word to Ronald and Rick from Randstad, who are going to tell you something about the talent journey at Randstad and the measurements that Crunchr did here.
Hi, I'm Rick. Before we dive in how we are using Crunchr within our company, I would like to give you a short outline of our talent management process, so you have a little bit more context. I will start sharing my screen with you. And on this slide, you can see some aspects of our process. We start with the people cycle we have, and especially two of the elements of that is how we develop people and how we give them an environment to utilize their talents. But before we know how to develop them, what kind of things they need to grow, but also how they can apply their talents, it's very important for us that we know them. And that's the second part of it. So we have great conversations within our company, and in those conversations, it's not only about business goals, but it's also about personal development on the long, but also on the short term. And we put goals on that together to make sure we make the desirable developments really actionable. We support that in the grow part with programs, trainings, projects, exchange, all those kind of things that are needed or desired by our talents. And the last one is flow, and that we make sure that people are on the right place, on the right time. We also said a talent is not a manager's asset, it's a organizational asset. So we really look together with each other to where we should put the talent to work. And that's also done, of course, with the talent. It's not only a decision of the organization. We also run a people review at least once a year, but managers are free to do it more often if they want to have a more up-to-date picture of how the workforce is. We use, of course, performance, KPIs, but we also look at the potential side, and we use two elements for that. That's the learning agility, the 5 dimensions of learning agility, and our human forward leadership framework, although the framework is also a little bit used as a rounding factor in it. And this framework is built up in 4 pillars and 4 core competences. With all those data, we plot the people in, the well-known 9 grid. And we use the 9 grid as a tool to have a good conversation about our talents. So it's not a mathematical manner of just putting in one of the boxes and that's it. It's just when they are there, then we start the conversations and see if there is a shared view on it, but also what are the actions we can do to help our talents to grow further. And under this, there is also reward and the development really in the practice. So this is a little bit of the context I want to give you before we go to the next slide. And therefore, I will hand over to my colleague, Ronald. He will give you a little bit more in-depth information how we are using the data that is in a Crunchr tool and helps us to make data-driven decisions. So, Ronald, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Rick, for sharing that and taking us along the journey on talent management within Randstad. My name is Ronald Kliphuis. I'm head of reward at Randstad and also heavily involved in all the HR data analytics that we do at Randstad. So today I will show you a bit around on what data insights we use around talent management within Randstad. A few slides prepared for that as well. And I think one of the main things to keep in mind that within Randstad, we really try to create data-driven insights and ultimately to improve our decision-making with that. And it goes from business to HR to all the way down to talent management. So with that said, I have a few slides for you. First of all, it's on millennials, because this webinar has a clear focus on that. So what we did is we looked in Crunchr, which is our HR analytics tool, and we looked at what we see around millennials. Now on this slide, on the top right, you see employee distribution. So this is on the 9-box grid that Rick explained is a clear or a very common instrument that we use to understand how our talent is doing. And what you see here is that millennials, compared to the rest of the organization, have a clearly higher potential. As the low potential line, they are less common in those areas. Now that said, millennials, obviously it's an important group, but we don't really use labels like millennials or Gen Z internally within Randstad. We look a lot more at trends to just see how the organization develops. And Crunchr allows us to do just that. So actually, if we talk about this, we look a lot more on, let's say, the chart on the bottom right, where you see age brackets, and we just plot the low and high potential ratings to see if there are trends. And if you look at that, you can clearly see that high potential ratings tend to go down slightly with age. But the interesting finding is that low potential ratings actually increase considerably when age goes up. So when you think about learning agility, one of the topics that Rick mentioned earlier on, I think this is clearly an interesting insight in that discussion that we also use to understand, okay, so how does that relate to each other? So that on, let's say, how we look at millennials and especially how we look at trends, then to see how effectively we manage talent management within Randstad, we also take a lot of different perspectives. One of them, for example, is the chart that you see in the top left on an undisclosed learning and development program, where we actually measure participants versus non-participants in a similar group, to what extent the speed to promotion or the years to promotions differ. You can actually see here that this program shows us that the time to promotion is actually half of the non-participants. Obviously, there's something here to be said about the chicken and the egg story. You know, are you nominated because you have a lot of potential, or does your potential increase after the program? But we are actively looking at this as a start, and we think that it's at the very least good that there's such a clear correlation here. We also look at, for example, some of the reward programs, and you can see that in the top right. Again, the 9-box score that we use a lot, and it shows the relative distribution of our talents across the 9-box grid. And here what you see is that the people that are actually participating in this reward program have a higher relative distribution to the top right. So basically what we see here is that this instrument is aimed to retain top talent, and actually participants in this program have a clearly higher talent score than, let's say, the reference group. So this is an indication for us that this instrument is used effectively and is targeting the right people. On the bottom left, you see engagement scores. So we also try to understand how engaged is our population, obviously. And again, if we plot the engagement scores across the 9-box grid, we, with a heat map approach, again see that top talent is clearly more engaged than people with a lower talent score. So this is also a key interesting finding for us. But we also look at retention of our talent. So what you see here is that retention is basically for us the inverse of turnover. And what you see here is that retention is relative high for top talents, high performance, high potentials. And you see it decreases when you go to the bottom left, with the exception of a low score, And that's actually an interesting finding for us. That also helps us to really look at how do we become more effective in this area, because obviously we would like to keep as much of our top talent as possible and see how we can develop people from a low to a better rating or to a position where they are better suited for. So this is actually, I think, a good example of how all these different insights lead to a finding that we feel that requires more focus, more investigation, and ultimately allows us to take action in a more effective manner to really just become a better company. I can imagine this is quite abstract if you just look at these charts. Obviously, we can't use our real data set in Crunchr for privacy reasons. We don't even want to do that. But what we did find was that perhaps Jeroen could give us a demo on actually how that would look in an anonymous environment. So with that, I think that comes to an end of my section. And Jeroen, I would like to ask you to show us around Crunchr to see how you could create these insights with the system itself. Jeroen, to you.
Thank you, Ronald and Rick, for explaining how Randstad is conducting their talent management. My name is Jeroen. I work as a customer success lead at Crunchr, which basically means I'm responsible for all the existing clients that we have. As Ronald mentioned several times, they're getting their insights out of Crunchr. So what I would like to do is give you a short tour through Crunchr to see how easy you can get your insights. I'd like to focus on, for instance, talent versus non-talent in your organization. I would like to focus on the 9 big grid box, the promotion rates, and of course the engagement scores. Sorry. So here you can see the welcoming page, or at least the workforce summary, as we call it. See the total headcount, and if we now already save the filter for millennials, and we're assuming that millennials are between 20 and 40. And this is a demo set, so no live data here. And in the filter, I also included everybody with a permanent contract to look for. So you see that it's only 7,659 people that are included in this filter set. And now let's include everybody who has been deemed or marked as a talent. So you see it only leaves 1,600 employees in there. From that perspective, you can see the average age, you can see the percentage females, etc., etc. So basically all the headlines you can see here. Going then, of course, to the overview, the performance overview, which gives us the 9-box grid. So here you see the distribution between everybody being marked as a talent with their potential and performance rating. So you see here 4.5% of your potential and performance ratings include 4.5% of the employees, which in actual numbers is 67 employees. From that perspective, it can of course be interesting. By the way, if you want to see who they are, just click on it and a new table will open with all the names in there. But to keep the speed going, I would like to go to the promotion page, for instance. So if we click on promotions, what could be interesting, of course, is to see everybody who's being marked as talent with a permanent contract and between 20 and 40, so the millennials, what's their promotion rate? So you see that it's 8.9%. But what could be interesting, is of course, is see how the total group of talents in comparison to talents with a high performance and high potential rate are different. If you go, I already created the filter set again. You see that the promotion rate for everybody with a high potential and high performance rating is 10.4%. And if you want to see how the promotion rate over time looks like, you can just click on it and go to the trend bar. And on the trend bar, you see per month what the promotion rate was in the previous years. So it can also include 2018 and 2017. From that perspective, we see that the promotion rate for high potential and high performance is higher. So let's look at engagement, for instance. How is that going? So if we look at engagement, you see that it needs to load, and the average scores will become visible here. So we, in this demo set, we decided to go for absorption, dedication, and vigor. So here you see the average scores of this group, so the high performance, high potential. And if you want to compare that, for instance, to other ones, just click the compare data. and another table or another column will open up, and here you see the difference. So you see that the overall engagement for the entire organization is higher, but you see that then on dedication, for instance, the average engagement scores for the high potential, high performance millennials is higher. Do keep in mind this is a demo data set, so this is not an actual reflection of an organization. So this is basically in short the topics that I wanted to show you. If you want to know more, please let us know. Happy to show you more insights in which you can get out of Crunchr. For now, I would like to wish you a lot of fun with the other speakers of the webinar, and perhaps talk to you soon. Okay, thank you, and goodbye.
Yes, thank you very much for your interesting insights, Ronald and Rick. And then we have now selected questions to answer. And the first question comes from Marlies. And she asked that she missed the SO explanation in the story of Rick. So she asked what it stands for, basically. And I will now give the word to Ronald from Randstad.
Yeah, thank you. So SO actually stands for so. I guess kind of the so what, why are we doing this? And it's really the part about where we think about what are our future talent needs. You know, what do we need to be successful and have a competitive advantage in the future? What type of skills and what volume of skills do we need to reach that? So it's kind of the starting point where we think about talent development and how it fits the needs that we expect in the future.
Yes, thank you very much, Ronald. And there's another question that came in from Sarah. And she says to you, thanks for these insights. It are strange times where we are in at this moment. And did you do some analytics related to the COVID-19 situation?
I would say almost obviously yes. Perhaps not so much talent related, but we do really try to understand what's going on both outside, but especially also inside Randstad. So, for example, with economy scaling down, there's a clear a situation where a lot of our consultants become idle. There's not enough work. So we try to understand what level that is in the organization. And you see that in a lot of the countries, there's a very different approach from government, how they do that. There are subsidies and government policies. And actually what we built in Crunchr was what we called it a COVID field that indicated, let's say, the level of idleness per employee, which allowed us to worldwide basically report on that and see what the trends are in terms of how business was developing and how our idle time within the organization was being managed. So I think that's one thing, but also looking ahead, it's with everything becoming much more digital, or at least the pace at which things become more virtual is very much increasing. We also try to understand how our organizational development is developing in that sense. So we quite actively look at number of reporting lines or a direct span of control to understand how our organization is adjusting and transforming to basically cope with the challenges that we have today.
Thank you very much, Ronald. And I see that there are still some other questions also coming in, but related to the time, we will get back to those at the end of this webinar. So please try to stay online until the end of this webinar, and otherwise we will get back to you on email. So thank you, Ronald, for answering the questions. And then we will now move on to our final presenters, and that are Jasper and Dirk. And they are from Millennial Lift, and they will tell you about how they see the future of talent and also on how to develop and build the new generation.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I would like to welcome you to the third and final part of this webinar. Together with my dear and esteemed colleague Dirk van Uffelen, we would like to focus on the action part. So what can you do as an organization to develop and foster the engagement of the new generation? Well, a bit of a background. My name is Jasper Scholte, and for the last 4.5 years, I've been really diving into the topic of millennials. I wrote a book about them called Het Millennial Mysterie, so the Millennial Mystery in English, as the book is only in Dutch for now. Consulted over 50 organizations, and on this path, I came across Dirk, who's a renowned trainer and coach, who designed to facilitate various traineeships and training programs for young professionals. So in this next 30-40 minutes, we would like to share with you some insight about the millennial mindset. So what are their values in regards to work, and how can you use this for your learning practices? So without further ado, I would really like to focus on the next step, and also build upon the millennial insights that Gavin shared with you. So I would like to build on, okay, how do millennials look at work? So about 2 years ago, I conducted with Dr. Art Bontekoning, career-wise and ethical, on a big millennial study here in the Netherlands. So we asked about 4,000 Dutch millennials about their energy gainers and drainers in work. And what we found out is that a lot of their energy gains stems from development, a sense of meaningful work, and work atmosphere. To briefly touch upon those, because as these also really help to, okay, how can you integrate and formulate a proper learning design, development plays a critical role for them. So about 2/3 of them said, okay, if we ask them, okay, what type of development are you looking for, is that the majority of them says, okay, well, personal development is most important. And what do they mean with personal development? It's about the identification and usage of the talents. And second of all, how to become more resilient. So what type of atmosphere, so what type of psychological safety environment can create this, the engagement, but also the learning objectives and outcome. And this is a binary part, so it's really about the relationship and about cooperation. So a lot of organizations focus on the individual contribution. However, millennials really value the cooperative team play, the team part. So this is in day-to-day life, but also in learning experience. So, for example, focus on cases where you really focus on achieving a goal together. And a relationship, is it really about trust? Is it really about openness? Is it transparent? This will build trust in itself, and also create this work environment and learning environment where a lot of millennials feel more valued and felt the strong intrinsic motivation to start developing themselves even more. So the next point I would like to share with you is the mismatch that I've seen that a lot of millennials face in the work. So the 5 points you see here are the main attributes that millennial would need in order to become most engaged. They feel most valued, and that their learning and development outcome is the highest. However, their expectations and reality can be quite different. For example, so the positive work atmosphere that really focuses on the relationship and collaboration, in reality has more of a top-down approach, where people wear professional masks, where the personal life is quite often disregarded. So it's disregard the trust base as well. The personal development part, so the personal development is a key driver for many millennials. However, most organizations, if they offer development opportunities, they focus on the professional development part. So this is also a really interesting part to reckon, and also link to your talent development process, to really understand, okay, well, what type of development do they need? So you can also accustom those in your learning practice. And of course, you don't always have to fully accustom to their needs, but it has to be a balance. And this balance will Dirk also address in his section. So we're happy to answer some of your questions you have. I'll be happy to give the virtual floor to Dirk, and thanks for your attention.
Well, Jasper, thank you for the introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Dirk van Nuffelen, and my presentation is about how to develop the new generation of talents. First, something about myself. I'm a co-founder of Millennial Lift, and at the same time a co-owner and practice lead at Crunchr and Millennial Lift. a scale-up company in the infrastructure business, a project delivery firm working on large projects like the A9 in the Netherlands. 20 years experience with young professionals, 15 years doing traineeships at Philips, Dutch Railways in Europe and in China, and also did a lot of assessments to select potentials for high potential programs at ING, ABN AMRO, Randstad. I have a background in organizational psychology, and I'm passionate about performance under pressure. Because of this reason, I'm writing a book. It's called The Quantum Millennial Guide. The Quantum Millennial is a subtype within the millennial generation, and very interesting because they are capable of performing under pressure. What should you take away from this presentation? I think 3 things. If you take away 3 things, my presentation would be successful. 1, I believe most talent management systems are broken. Employee experience and happiness concepts are great, but you should not apply that directly to training. We call that the Disneyfication of training programs. You should be careful with that. The second takeaway is managing talent development means managing psychological safety and does not mean maximizing psychological safety in training. The third one, you should prepare your talents for performance under pressure. We call that from agile to anti-fragile as a strategy. So these are the 3 takeaways. I will elaborate in more detail on the next slides. Takeaway 1, avoid Disneyfication of talent programs. As you probably all know, the Chief Happiness Officer and some happiness formulas, also the employee experience, are very actual HR learning and development themes. But we believe that a training program should not be like a Disney park. So the lessons you should implement is more military training. Make it a hero's journey instead of an employee's journey only. Give them proper resistance so that they can build their character, they can build their skills, especially under pressure. Then takeaway number 2, managing talent means managing psychological safety. And I can explain this the best by giving an example. Most millennials we encounter often say, I do not know what I want. The strategy we use, we try to reframe that and then challenge them, because our experience is that they do know what they want. Most millennials want clear goals. They want to work in a nice team. They're purpose-driven. They want to network. Exactly what Kevin just shared in the previous presentation. So what they actually mean is if they say, I don't know what I want, they actually mean they don't want what they know. They don't want the career paths of their parents. They want new experiences. They want new intensity levels. They want to learn. They want to grow. They want something new. Then we say, if you want something new, you want something unknown. But if you want something unknown, then life will not only give you entertainment. Life will also give you fear, will give you uncertainty, and will give you discomfort. And then that's the moment of truth where they have to prove that they are really willing to step out of their comfort zone, and not only talking about stepping out of their comfort zone or fantasizing about stepping out of their comfort zone, but actually doing that. And they will experience a lack of psychological safety. We will also say you will experience a defensive fight, flight, or freeze response. That's normal. That's a biological defense mechanism if you really step out of that comfort zone. And we will teach you how to move from defensive behavior to more constructive behavior while you feel unsafe. So this, if you apply this to training, that means lowering psychological safety in training. Then observe what kind of defensive behavior the talents display. And that's either aggressive defensive styles or passive defensive styles. And one model that perfectly explains this all is the Circumplex model by Human Synergistic, a Chicago-based firm. Check out the website. you can really use this. So the key takeaway, make sure you lower psychological safety in training, of course, without inflicting too much pain or injury or even trauma. That's absolutely not what you should do. So that's takeaway number 2. And then we move to takeaway number 3. That's preparing your talent for performance under pressure. If they're really talented, they will move up the career ladder very fast, and they will ask for challenging situations where they will experience pressure. So this means that in your training programs, you should implement even more pressure. And we call it you move from agile to anti-fragile. You probably know the book of Nassim Nicholas Taleb, where he says if you give them too much certainty, too much structure, they will become fragile. So if you lower the psychological safety, train in situations under pressure, observe behavior and show them how to deal with that, they will be more effective. One of the books that perfectly describes that is the book Performing Under Pressure. So absolutely advise you to read that book. The core strategy is forge healthy minds and healthy bodies, just like the Spartans did ages ago. So that's one of the strategies. And a joke that we make is you have to move from a lean black belt to a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. Yeah, so these are the 3 takeaways. But how would that look like in a concrete program? We call this the Quantum Talent Development Program. And we have exercises on a physical level, on a mental level, and on an emotional level. And we take them from various methodologies. And I'll give you some examples. Physical, for example, we have the Global Rewire program. Erwin van Beek is one of the thought leaders, and we applied that at KLM, where you have exercises from Russian Sistema, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, CrossFit, and of course also the mindfulness and breathing exercises. Really building powerful bodies. Then we have the mental exercises, mostly derived from the Special Forces training. Tibor Olgers here is one of the thought leaders, combined with Stoicism, lessons from the book Anti-Fragile, and we use sports psychology to make sure that the talents also under pressure can focus on their tasks. And one model we use is the attention circles of Eberspacher, the German sports psychologist, where you can teach your talents to keep focusing on their task. Then on an emotional level, probably also method you recognize, and you probably will also in training programs where you learn this: voice dialogue, psychodrama, provocative coaching. And very actual is the virtual reality fear coaching we use, where we use virtual reality glasses to let the talents experience real fear, and we teach them how to use breathing exercises to lower the level of fear. One theoretical model we love is the emotional intelligence model of Reuven Bar-On. And this year, a Dutch app came on the market. It's called My Inside Out, where you can put in situations you encounter, and the app will help you to discover what you feel and what your values are below that feelings. And 2 more points continuously. We think you should always combine training, blended learning with small group assignments focused on actual technical problems, challenges within your organization. The more actual, the more real, the better, because top talents love that. Give them also mentoring by senior leaders. They have respect for senior leaders, especially if the senior leaders lead by example. And an important note, as HR and learning and development professionals, you must participate in the program yourself. Also a part of leading by example. Well, this is an overview of the Quantum Talent Development Program we have developed. And this leaves me with one more statement, the future of talent management. If you do not challenge and train your talents physically, emotionally, and mentally, they will leave. We really believe that. And leading by example, including overall fitness, will be the most important leadership strategy to retain talent. Otherwise, your top talents that are constantly being influenced by the social media and tech firms will follow their thoughts and their ideas. So make sure you lead by example. Then, as Kevin also said, the co-creation with your talents will be purpose-driven. So you must know your own purpose as an HR and learning and development professional. And be more specific than I want to help people connect or I want to help people grow. What type of people, which situation, what is your vision on the future? Make sure you have that very clear so you can also have an inspiring vision to communicate with your top talents. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to my presentation. If you have any questions, please let me know. And,
yes, thank you very much for your insights, Dirk and Jasper. Yes, thank you very much for your insights, Dirk and Jasper. And then we will now answer the questions that have came in. And Dirk is actually sitting here right in front of me to answer the question. But he will not be seen on screen due to the 1.5 meters measures of Corona, of course. But he will answer the question. And we have had one coming in from Jeroen. And Jeroen asked, Dirk, how do millennials deal with the COVID crisis?
Well, Paula, actually, that's a very good question from Jeroen. What we see is that most millennials have an authentic desire to explore the world, the outer world, and their inner world. And now COVID is here. That puts severe limits on exploring the outer world. And it depends on the personality of the millennial, how they deal with that. The more extroverted persons, they can feel isolated and lonely, so they need more attention. The more introverted people, they have less difficulty to deal with that. So I would say take into account their personality and customize your strategy.
Okay, thank you very much. And yeah, there was the only question coming in. Oh, I see another one coming in actually, and this is from Chris, and he says, thanks, Dirk. Do you see the biggest learning gap / opportunity for millennials in the physical, emotional or mental domain? And why is that?
Well, Chris, that's also a very good question. Thank you for that question. I would say that it's one part, so we cannot differentiate between the parts. If I would have to answer your question, I would say on an emotional level. So how can I deal with negative emotions? And how can I keep focusing on my task and keep moving and keep connecting with other people, even if I feel those negative emotions? And that's where, for example, the attention circles of Eberspacher, the German sports psychologists, are very, very helpful.
Okay, very good. And I see another question going in. You're popular.
Oh, wow.
Andri says, interesting. How would you start learning from the retention rates, etc.? What talent is or should be? So moving back from results to your definition. Oh, this one was for Randstad, actually, I see now. Well, actually, we're almost through the time. Yeah. So I think I first want to close this webinar, and I want to thank you all very much for joining this webinar on behalf of Quintop, Crunchr and Millennial Lift. And I hope you all gained some very valuable insights. You will receive a recording of this webinar in your email with also our contacts. And also, if you still have questions, then please stay for a bit longer in this webinar, because I see a lot of questions still coming in, and we are really happy to answer those. So thank you again for watching, and to those that are already leaving, goodbye. And then I see this question from Randstad, Ronald. I will then give the word to you. And the question again was, how would you start learning from the retention rate, etc., what a talent is or should be, so moving back from results to your definition? And it was a question from Andries.
Well, yeah. So actually, I find it I need to give it some thought, in which in general, I don't think that at Randstad, at least, we look back. Retention rate in itself is not for us something that defines a talent. A talent is somebody with specific skills that we really need or require at a certain point, and we want to retain talents. It's not so much that if people just stay long enough with the company, they would become a talent. So I'm not really sure I understand the question.
Yes, thank you, Ronald. I see other questions coming in. Jannes asked, what is the definition of promotion rate? And I guess it's also from you, Ronald.
Yeah, well, I think in Randstad we take two perspectives that we find important. So if we look at promotions at Randstad, that's actually just going up a job level or a grade in the company. But we also take a keen look at, let's say, what we call internal mobility. Just being, just continuously developing your skills and your capabilities in that sense to become more employable and add value to the company. So it's two perspectives on internal mobility and promotion.
Thank you, Ronald. I think that's were all of the questions I just see in this presenter chat. So then I would now really want to close the webinar. Thank you all very much again for joining, and goodbye.